Good morning, and welcome to Mind What Matters, our webinar series to help keep our business community informed about a variety of topics in the marketplace. They offer important and relevant information and resources to the business community. And the recordings of these webinars are always available after the virtual event and can be found both on our website and on the Chamber's YouTube channel. To begin, I'd like to thank our series sponsors whose support for this allows us to bring you this webinar series at no cost. And our sponsors for the series include Delta Dental, Pacific Source Health Plans, Sprout Partners, Peace Health Southwest, Northwest Natural, the Peak Fleet, Columbia Bank, Opsal Dawson, Waste Connections, and On Point Community Credit Union. So a robust group of sponsors who all deserve your support should you find a need in their sector. So today we have a very current and interesting topic. Dean Chip Hunter has joined us from Washington State University, Carson College of Business, and is here to discuss a study conducted on Gen Z. Gen Z is the generation whose age ranges from 10 to 25 years old, and the study results Dr. Hunter will share address the views of Gen Z as they begin to enter the workforce. Dean Hunter has nearly 30 years in higher education, focusing on both management and human resources. For the past 7 years, Dr. Hunter has been the Dean of the Carson School of Business at Washington State University, Pullman. And now if Dean Hunter would join me on the stage. Takes just a moment for him to come on camera. Every platform has its own little characteristics. So good to have you with us this morning, Dean, and I'm going to leave the stage to you.
Great. Well, thanks for that introduction, John. I appreciate it. I'm Chip Hunter. I'm the Dean of the Carson College at Washington State University. A little bit about us and our programs. We have students on 4 physical campuses across the state of Washington. Our flagship in Pullman, which is where I'm coming from today, and then thriving campuses with business programs in Vancouver, the Tri-Cities, and Everett. We also have a robust online program, and those students are in our global campus. And today, I'm going to share some key findings from the report John mentioned, our 2022 Business in the Northwest Gen Z Spotlight Report, part of a bigger study where we really looked at the business climate in the Northwest, but burrowed in because it's a topic of such timely interest to get more detail on what we're learning about our youngest members of the workforce. And this has particular relevance to us in the college, in part because, of course, we teach Gen Z now too, particularly in our undergraduate programs. Most of our students are Gen Z students. We adult learners and across our programs, but certainly in our residential on-campus programs, the bulk of our students are now members of this generation. I'll supplement the report, which was done several months ago now, with some other things we've learned and what we're picking up as we work with our students and what's going on around us. And certainly welcome questions at any time. Want to also note as we kick in here that these kinds of events and partnerships in general between the business community and higher education institutions, very important, not just to us, but to the economy of our entire region. Our college, the Carson College, and Washington State University more generally, are committed to helping you develop your future talent pool. And we also want to work with you to make sure we all share a better understanding of what's happening in the business world around us. After 2 years of navigating the challenges brought on by the pandemic, Our fifth annual Business in the Northwest report found that the future of the work in the Pacific Northwest is going to be influenced by this phenomenon that became known as the Great Resignation, as well as evolving employee expectations and considerable, and I would say ongoing, debate over the idea of returning to the office. However, in the context of the more general report, I want to note that the Pacific Northwest remains a great place to do business, at least as our study bears out. There is a lot of optimism about the future of the business climate in the Pacific Northwest. And so in addition to doing this survey of business leaders and a more general set of employees around the Pacific Northwest, as I mentioned, we really wanted to get a sharper read on the views and opinions and attitudes of the Gen Z workforce. So today I'm going to focus particularly on that part of the Business in the Northwest report, walking you through some of the key findings from that report and sharing some insights on what they mean for the future of business here in the region. Also, we'll note, and I believe it's in the chat, or my colleague Eric Hollenbeck will get it up in the chat. We've got a link to the report on our website, and there's a lot of stuff in there that I won't cover today, as well as you can find the data backing up some of the things I'm going to tell you that we found. I want to start with a key finding, and I think as time has unfolded, as I mentioned, this report was done several months ago. The survey was. So I think most of the things in it, you're going to say, yeah, we're starting to feel that too, or maybe even have some questions you want to raise about what we're going to say. Where are things moving? First key finding is that despite feeling like they missed out and are missing out on some of the in-person office experience, Gen Z employees still prefer the new ways of working brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's a bit of a paradox in here. 2/3 of the Gen Z employees told us they feel behind some of their coworkers and peers because they never had the traditional office experience. Most of them started their jobs during a pandemic. However, at the time we did the survey, over half said they weren't ready to return fully to the workplace. And most of them, 63%, told us they don't think the traditional 9-to-5 office setting is for me. And this wasn't even if you roll this back to last winter, this is not because of safety concerns primarily. 3/4 of the folks told us that, yeah, it's safe to return to the workplace. I'm just not really excited about doing that. And the safety concerns had really ticked down since we did the report earlier in 2021. About 1/4 of them were telling us it's, we still don't feel good about that. And I'm sure that has dropped since the time we did the survey as well, though I can't prove it till we do the next survey. Now, shifting away from the pandemic and this idea of working from home, but I think this is going to matter as we get into some discussion. Significantly, Gen Z employees want to work for a company, they say, whose values align with their own. And this is true in comparison to other generations and what they're telling us. Now, what we can't say for sure is this something that's always been true of young people, because we don't really have good data going back. Nobody asked the millennials or Gen X or the boomers, when they were at this stage of the workplace, how important is it to work for a company whose values align with yours? But this is an issue that's really popped in salience. And at least as you're looking at your current workforce, what you're going to see is that if your workforce is typical, our Gen Z employees are placing a greater emphasis than any others on company values and on the extent to which they believe their employers care about their own well-being. So over 9 in 10 of these workers said that it is crucial to work for a company that cares about employee well-being. 82%, and this is, I think, really significant, said that diversity, equity, and inclusion are a must-have in the workplace. They want to see workplaces that are diverse, that treat people fairly, and are inclusive. They also are very focused on mental health. And 70% of the Gen Z employees told us they only want to work for a company that provides clear mental health offerings as part of their employee benefits programs. About the same percentage say that well-being seminars are good for morale. And this was a bump up from the first time we did the survey. And again, back to this issue of values, and we're sort of implicitly telling you values are around emphasizing mental health, are valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. But 80% of the workforce from the Gen Z perspective said they want to work for a company and would prefer only to work for a company whose values align with their own. Moving back to the experiences rolling out of the pandemic, Gen Z employees told us that their career trajectory has been slowed, they believe, due to COVID-19, and they're looking at their employers to provide the resources they need to grow. I mentioned they're worried that starting their careers remotely has hindered their growth. And a majority, 60%, feel less passionate about their chosen industry of work. Over 3/4 are really rethinking if they want to stay in their current job career or switch to something else. And they are also placing a heavy emphasis on reskilling and training. In fact, 3/4 of these employees told us that additional training for employees had a positive impact on their morale. This was a big bump up from 2021. They would like to see their employers continue to invest in training. And again, you can pop yourself, I should say, to our webpage if you want to see some of these data in more detail. But employees are responding positively. They say a positive impact on morale from things like well-being seminars, this ability to work from home either remotely or entirely. And these popped in 2022 in comparison with our 2021 survey. So as people got more familiar with these things and saw what employers could be doing to enable them to stay mentally healthy, to focus on their wellness, as well as to have hybrid work opportunities, options, et cetera, they said these things had a positive impact on their morale. And this was not just a majority of Gen Z, but Gen Z employees saying this with more emphasis than other employees. We asked for a kind of a laundry list of what do you hope your company will keep in the future? In other words, what should they not throw out during the pandemic? And the top things listed here, I mentioned additional training for employees, more opportunities for training, including reskilling and mental health resources. Not to be underestimated, though. They liked it when their pay went up in those tight labor markets where every one of you were competing for employees. And so they also mentioned raised wages as a top candidate there, and are continuing to ask for these hybrid work options as well. Now, I don't know whether this read so far to you comes off as gloomy or negative. It shouldn't. Gen Z employees overall are positive and hopeful about the future of business in the Northwest, but they're not particularly certain about what it holds. We found that 55% of them told us they feel unsure about what the future holds for their company. Now, I will note that in 2021, the year before, this was 70%. So, in fact, this uncertainty is on the decline. We also noted that there was more optimism as people begin to see that that in most of our industries, the pandemic had not devastated their economy, or as in some of the harder hit industries like hospitality, things were starting to bounce back. Employees much more optimistic as we were coming out of the pandemic. So about 49% of the employees in our survey, almost half, said they're worried about the growth potential for their career in the Pacific Northwest. But that was down significantly from the year before, when 68% told us they were worried about their growth potential. And a clear majority were hopeful that their company would expand in the next year, and said, in fact, for themselves in their own position, they have what they need to help be successful. And less worried about downsizing in 2022. That's one of the things that I wonder if is starting to turn back as we have these continued conversations around, just as we did yesterday, about what the Fed's doing, whether we're headed for recession or not. And so we'll be interested to see where that trend heads in the future. I mentioned earlier that Pacific Northwest employees in general are beginning to evaluate what matters most to them and want to work for a company that aligns with their values, with this being particularly salient for Gen Z. Again, it's really across the board, but most salient among Gen Z that we're talking about this greater emphasis on mental health, on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and saying that these things have moved from oh, that's interesting, to kind of a must-have with employees. And I think that's something we might want to talk about some more as we get into questions in the chat. Now, I want to also touch a little bit more on return to office. Employees have really enjoyed the flexibility that this has provided, where their workplace has enabled them, or in fact, if we roll this back a year, even required them to work remotely. Most of our employees believe, again, that it's safe to work on site right now, yet most of them are also saying, we hope our companies continue to offer flexible work. Business leaders and employees both are enjoying the flexibility the remote work brings, but they're also talking about the challenges that it offers to them. And top of the list of the challenges are collaboration and teamwork, communication skills, and ability to manage teams, that where we're looking at people reporting negative impacts from remote working. Now, if we look specifically at Gen Z and what they're saying, I want to kind of go back and reiterate that the Gen Z folks in particular are saying that their passion for their chosen industry has declined. COVID-19 made them rethink if they want to stay at their current job. And I want to emphasize this. Most of Gen Z believe that they are behind their coworkers because they never got a traditional office on-site experience. Now, there's a bit of an irony here, because the Gen Z, and if those of you who are like me, raising 20-somethings may not be shocked by this, or those of us in higher ed who are teaching them won't be shocked by this either. Despite the fact that they believe this remote work has left them behind in important ways, these employees are saying that they still prefer the new ways of working. They want to work, and they work best in a flexible work environment. Almost 3/4 of these employees, about the same share who are saying this is keeping us back, are saying, but we want hybrid, we want to work hybrid. So that's kind of an interesting paradox. Again, in general, these folks are very optimistic about where things are headed. I'd be happy to break this down further and respond to your questions, because I'd like to make this more of a dialogue than me talking at you. So I'll take just a minute here to wrap up. I hope that you agree with us in the Carson College that understanding how Gen Z is faring is really important to us, as the youngest members of our region's workforce are going to be our leaders of the future. And we've got to figure out what it's going to take to get them from where we are now to where we need them to be over the next 5, 10, and 20 years, if we're going to continue to maintain the vibrancy of the Pacific Northwest as a place to do business. And so we're hoping modestly in the Carson College that some of the topics that we've explored here and the data we've collected and are reporting on, including this focus on our youngest workers, will help drive some conversations, which is why I'm here today. We'd like to address these issues together and propel us forward as a business community. And so I want to, as I wrap here, encourage you to continue to help us build collaboration between what your businesses need and what higher ed's providing. And as we build these partnerships, we're going to strengthen the economy and the state of the workforce in the Pacific Northwest. So with that, I thought I would take a breath and see what questions are on your mind. So I'm happy to respond to what you're interested in here.
Dean Hunter, I think to get us started, given the age of Gen Z and the fact that for the most part, they're 2 to 4 years in the workforce.
Yeah.
Should we consider some of these findings by them radically different than, say, Gen X or Boomers as they entered the workforce, or is it constant with someone who's just gaining experience in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. One always wants to treat dramatic generational findings with a grain of salt and say, is this really a generational phenomenon, or is this something that's always been true of the kids today? And, as folks, mature, as they acquire mortgages, these kinds of things, do their attitudes naturally evolve over time? And while we can't address all of those things directly with these data, because this is a survey just a couple of points in time, close in time, and we don't have great data on how, for example, boomers felt about. I think there are a couple of key changes that we do want to be attuned to. One of those is definitely the way that Gen Z interacts with technology. This is the first generation that has had this technology at their hands since at the age where you and I were learning to read. They were smartphones, and this has effects on everything from the tiniest to the biggest kinds of attitudes. If you want a tiny anecdote that's means a little more to my faculty than it might to some of you. Most of Gen Z, this is an amazing fact, most of Gen Z can't read cursive. So when you get a memo from a Gen Z employee and you scribble a bunch of comments on and hand it back to them, and they go, "Oh yeah, thanks, boss," able to read what you wrote. And so there are true generational differences here. And again, that's a silly little example, but kind of important for faculty writing comments on term papers. But there are some real differences with the facility, with the way people deploy their attention, those sorts of things that are truly different in Gen Z. I think also the social climate, while it has, there's been ups and downs. We know the boomers went through the 60s. There are some unique aspects of what Gen Z has been through in the last 5 years, I think, that are truly different and shaping. And I think this emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this notion that my employer's values are important is salient in a new and unique way. And there is some other evidence that that's true. So I wouldn't want to lose that. So technology, I think, and this emphasis on values as a product of, say, the last 5 years or so, I think are truly different.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Just to support your comment about the ability to read cursive, we recently had an intern here at the chamber, and we gave the young lady a project to email back and forth with our members. And she took the assignment from her supervisor and went to one of the coworkers and said, "Can you tell me about this email?" He said, I don't know how to use Outlook, right? Because they're doing text or some other social platform. So it was eye-opening for us as well.
Yeah.
So let me go back to your key insights that you reviewed for us, and I have a couple of questions for you that have come in for that. On the first of the findings, is it possible the consequences of this be that the Gen Z employees get frustrated and leave early due to further delays and personal impacts on their professional growth?
Yeah, I think that is a concern. I think that, and again, this is one of those things, back to your earlier question, do we want to differentiate between Gen Z and always kind of trying to find their footing in the labor market? And I think we'll know a lot more about that pretty soon, because we've begun to see data that says the quits are dropping. People are beginning to realize, wait a minute, I'm not sure that I as a worker will always have the upper hand and be able to name my terms. If I don't work remote, I don't work, those kinds of things. It looks like we're out of that great resignation and into a different environment where the employee fight as strong a hand. There is always going to be some churn among our youngest workers as they look for places. But I do think one of the things they're saying here is really critical. And they're saying we're not sure the place for us, and so it's hard for us to tell. And yet we want to continue this hybrid thing. And I think there probably is going to be some churn as long as we're remote. If we don't, see some kind of more dramatic innovations that allow employees really to connect with one another better, and or we call them all back to the office. Just as an example, one of the things we're hearing from our recent grads is the difficulty is, so suppose you're on an internship, not even a graduate yet. You're not sure if the experience you're is just yours or typical of other interns, and it's a little hard to jump on a call or get in a chat to ask that question. That's the kind of thing you want to ask at the coffee shop, you want to ask in the break room, you want to ask at happy hour, right? And so just finding ways to get those conversations going has been difficult. And I think as long as there are opportunities, you will see some who are frustrated continue to kind of vote with their feet. And again, as the labor market shifts, we'll see how prevalent that is. But I think as long as people are uncertain, you're going to see some of this.
Yep. So we have a couple of questions that come in from our audience this morning. So let me go to those. What would you recommend for helping guide the attitudes of Gen Z? We'll deal with this and specifically dealing with the potential for a strong sense of entitlement. Pointing out that, they like the flexible work, but they don't want to do extra to address anything that needs fixing.
Right. Yeah, I think this is it goes broader than Gen Z, but it's very critical to Gen Z. Is the more that you have a strong integrated approach to performance management, where expectation, I'm going to get to a little problem with this at the end, but because this is not a magic bullet, but where from beginning to end, you have performance expectations in the job that are reinforced by a portfolio of human resource practices. This notion of entitlement is less likely to come on the table. It'll come on in a particular way. But if you have training, review, compensation, and even the way you choose employees, all focused around what you really believe are the performance expectations of the job, you will have less difficult conversations around employees who aren't meeting those. And you also won't have to have conversations about, well, this employee's acting entitled. The question is, are they getting the work done that you expect or not? Now, there's a couple of challenges with this. One is if they don't accept the role that you've decided is appropriate for them. And I think that actually is, if the whole performance management system is geared up to reinforce that, I think that's when you start to look at kind of functional turnover. And Gen Z employees are going to start to learn that they're not running the company without the right level of experience. Sure. And some of that is just the natural learning. I think where those things don't reinforce, though, you've got a real challenge. Which is, the training is setting up for one thing, but the compensation is expecting another, and the role expectations are yet a third. Now, there's one piece of this that I think we will still struggle with. And this goes back to, I think the easiest way to put this is my favorite quote. Now, I'm not Gen Z, so I get to share one of my favorite oracles, who they don't even know who the heck he is. But there used to be this football coach named Bum Phillips, who was a real character, wore a big old cowboy hat, and he had a lot of folksy sayings. But one of my favorite sayings of his, I thought applied so much to this question, which is there's two kind of players that aren't worth a darn. And one of them's the one who never does what you tell him, but the other is the one who only does what you tell him. And so a really tight performance management system doesn't have the virtue of saying, oh, yeah, but the thing we really want is the people to go above and beyond, but we don't want you to be entitled. So getting that balance right, I think, remains an art rather than a science, encouraging that extra oomph, and not saying, well, you're acting entitled because you don't give me the extra oomph. That's not what I'm saying here. It's like, okay, this is your role, but how do I call out and recognize people who find the right ways to contribute to the overall success of the company? I think is art, not science, but it's really where you see successful companies that are really organized to do this. So I think that's where I'd come down on the entitlement question.
Good. So staying with kind of the employee environment, the next question says, with Gen Z staying at the workplace, I think this is in terms of term, for a shorter amount of time, or as a gig style worker, what are your thoughts on how employers should prepare for the constant change at the entry and mid-level jobs?
Well, I guess I'd back up a step and say, is this really something you actually prepared to accept? There's some interesting work that goes back well before the pandemic that suggests that employers systematically underestimate the costs of turnover and overestimate the costs associated with retention. Now, during the pandemic, they figured out at least that they needed to raise wages some, to otherwise they had no workers, right?
Right.
But often we really, it's easy to measure the cost of increasing wages to keep people, right? Easy to measure that. You know what's flowing out in a cash sense. What's harder to measure is the cost of looking for new employees, of re-engaging people in gigs, of managing that gig, of onboarding new people, of saying goodbye to the old ones, all of those things. And we tend to underestimate those. So I would say the first thing is to ask yourself, do you really want to accept this? Or are there things you could be doing as an employer, which, like, gosh, they cost me money, but do they really? That's where I'd start. Now, sometimes the answer is, yeah, I've done everything I can here, and I'm going to have more churn. There's just more going on out there. It's just very confusing. And I think I don't really have magic bullets to figure out what you can do about this. I think building realistic, goes back to what I said before, building realistic role expectations of what you can expect on the productivity end from people who aren't likely to stay for the long haul is important. And then to build systems that acknowledge the reality of that, whether that's a technology or even, just the way people are expected to interact with each other. You're going to see, for example, less kind of willingness to go above and beyond on the training aspects and how do you help onboard new people and those kinds of things. So don't assume that stuff is going to happen. You're going to have to give it some attention. And I think the other thing I'd say is it's on two fronts, but making sure that your supervisors who are really struggling with this, the frontline supervisors or the next line up, who supervisors might be turning over, are rewarded and acknowledged if they're doing a good job of managing that situation, both maybe keeping people a little longer or building systems that are robust to that churn. And I think sometimes your frontline supervisors who really take the brunt of this. And so getting down to that supervisory level and saying, what can we do? We know this churn is out there, but we're really constrained on the wage front or something like that. So what else can we think about doing to help you do your job? Do you need better technology? Do you need to staff up a little bit? What can we do here?
This next question, I think, really goes to the heart of that retention effort.
Yeah.
But looking at the Gen Z folks that this person works with, she or he describes them as having fewer boundaries and higher expectations for information about how the company is doing and what it's doing, and is asking, what can we do to help manage those boundaries and expectations? And certainly to your point about the frontline supervisor, sometimes they'd be willing to share, but they're not getting the information from above.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. And I've seen some stuff on this. This doesn't pop from our own report, John, but I've seen some stuff on this that suggests, and my own experience is consistent with this, both with our own faculty and staff and with our students here at Washington State, that often when people say they want, more information or more communication, that's part of what they're saying, but what they're really looking for is more dialogue. They want to be heard. So they, you could flood them with data, on here's the P&L for the last 5 years, and here's it broken down by division, and oh, great, but that didn't answer my question. My question was this: will I still have a job next week? And how can I be confident in that? And so I think one of the things, empowering supervisors to listen carefully, and then listening carefully to the supervisors, as well as building those channels to ask ourselves, what does it mean to have two-way communication, not just flooding information down? In fact, sometimes saying to them, there's things we share and things we don't, and here's why, but tell me what you want to know and why you want to know it, and how to help you do your job. And often there's something really interesting in that. Well, here's how it would help me do my job. If you guys would tell us this, we could communicate this kind of stuff to the customers. No, we're not stupid. We wouldn't tell the customers, oh, the company's going broke or something like that. We just want to know, because we don't know anything. We're kind of winging it. And we feel stupid talking to the customers. It's like, yeah, we don't want you to feel stupid talking to the customers, do we? So that's what you're saying. Okay, here's how we can give you that information. So I think recasting this, not so much as a tell us everything, but let's start a dialogue here. And that's not the open and shut here, but I think often if you really dig into this, that's a big part of what this this new generation wants to know. They're telling you they want to know, but a big chunk of it is they want to be heard.
You want to be heard. Yeah, that makes sense. In the study, it talks a lot about the desire for the Gen Z worker to work for a company that cares about them and their health and well-being.
Yep.
Are you familiar with any case studies where employers have done that successfully? There's a question about, this. They may not understand exactly what that means or how to communicate it if they do.
Yeah. I think one of the simplest ones, and I think the younger workforce has picked up on this, is in a very literal operational sense. Does the benefits package include mental health as well as our traditional physical health? So is it allowed to call out with a mental health day? Is that part of your sick leave? And do the supervisors roll their eyes, or do they say, we get it? Today's a day where you're not going to be able to do your best work, and we have a sick leave program. Stay home, get yourself well, and I'll see you tomorrow or the day after. And then if we need various kinds of whether it's therapy, pharmaceutical, all this kind of stuff that a lot of this generation is very familiar with from their adolescence and those kinds of things, whether it's themselves or their friends. Does the health plan support that? So that's a kind of a for employers who are thinking about how their their package is being perceived. That's an increasing piece of it, and I would not underestimate that. I think that the next thing I'd say is that there is a cynicism. Again, is this generation young people being cynical about the us oldsters? I'm telling them how things are. I can't say, but I think there is a cynicism about companies that make grand statements and pronouncements, that run ads and tell you stuff. I think small steps that are real are often better received than big statements these days. The statements, I think, used to matter, and every once in a while, a company doesn't feel itself, maybe we should have got out there in front of whatever the issue. But I think more to the point is back to this role of supervisors. I think some small coherence on values that is deep and clearly expressed, and the supervisors have bought into and are communicating that down, has a lot more traction than big statements and a kind of a central office that's telling you these things are important. And the supervisors, along with the Gen Z, are all rolling their eyes at this stuff. And so where I have heard about, and the data on this is still really ropey, so I'm not sure I would take these results to the bank, but where I've heard that people feel like they're making progress, it's often on smaller steps where they believe everybody's bought in, rather than it is on grand pronouncements.
Yeah, good advice. Let's go back to the issue around the preference for remote work, and employers across all of the industry sectors are dealing. Do we stay remote? Do we create some sort of hybrid? Do we demand that everyone come back? Even the employers who are fine with a remote or hybrid situation acknowledge that collaboration and communication are difficult. So there are a couple of things that employers can do that would help shore up those dynamics.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about your inbox, but I'm being sold 3 or 4 solutions for this daily. And if any of these worked great, I'd probably go over and join the sales team, right? Because I
Sure,
think
sure.
there's a lot of money to be made by the folks who really lick this one. So I'm feeling a little undergunned here. One of the things that I actually do like, though, and we're trying to figure this out in my own college, is reverse mentoring. And this is, you think it's a technology thing, but it's more of a social thing. And can us more experienced members of the workforce admit that we might have some things to learn? So I'll roll my eyes and say, God, on Zoom, I just don't see how anybody does anything collaboratively. We all got to get back into the office. And then when our Gen Z folks are saying, boss, that's not quite right. Tell me more. Tell me how this fake collaboration actually works and comes up with people working together and getting ideas. Because I don't get it, because I feel like a robot or a little voice in a box on Zoom. Where is this collaboration happening? And it's happening in weird technologies that I don't know how to work, or it's happening by putting two things together that I wouldn't put together. And can I at least drop my guard enough to try some of this stuff and learn it? So I think there are some small wins to be had from getting everybody on the same page in reverse mentoring. If some of us who are skeptical of this stuff will drop our guard, I admit I find this very difficult. I find, and I've seen this from, I think even our, probably our older millennials are even saying, get me in a room with a whiteboard. I'm tired of Zoom, right? I need to have some people around a table and a cup of coffee to really get this going. And I think there's some dialogue to be had there. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of, but this is a pitched battle right now, is trying to figure out if we can declare some times when it's time for everybody to come back to work. So for example, a close colleague of mine runs the Seattle offices for Apple, and Apple has made this declaration, 3 days a week. But what does that really mean? And does it mean they all come back the same 3 days and then you're paying for everybody's space and office? Or are they alternating, and why? And so that gets to the last thing I wanted to say on this, John. I think the why, when you're trying to address this, is really important. And so saying, not just ordering everybody back to work because we got no collaboration and communication isn't quite enough. It's to say, we really need you back because here's what we've missed. And here's how it connects up to what we see as successful for the company and for you in your role. And so if we are going to mandate people come back and sit around that table and whiteboard, make sure that we're communicating out why we believe that's important. And stuff that you may think is obvious isn't always obvious to people. Why do we all have to come back on the same day? It's crowded. I don't want to come in. Why do we all have to come in at the same time? Well, let's all pause a minute and think about this and say, because we won't get those benefits. And let's talk it through. And do you have some other solutions that will enable us to get to the same place? And often what we'll hear is, no, actually, I just kind of liked working from home and I don't have a solution either. So tell me when to come and I'll get there, but don't make me come, 48 hours a week. Right. Let's talk.
So essentially you're saying that because I said so doesn't work anymore.
I don't think because I said so ever worked great. The because I said so is, the whole thing of this quiet quitting. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with that conversation. Most of the research, including some very up-to-date stuff, suggests, this is not new. People have been, when they have a little bit of labor market, opportunity, quiet quitting has been a thing for quite some time. And again, that's where the because I said so just is not all that helpful. Here's why, and let's have some conversation. And having, again, back to our supervising, have our supervisors empowered to have those conversations is more meaningful. To a point, I do want to make sure I'm not going so far as to say, everybody gets a vote on everything, which does come back to the very first question about the sense of entitlement. And I think being very clear on what our responsibilities are, if I'm the boss and I'm responsible for the continued success over time of this organization in a way that I wouldn't expect you to be, I do have the responsibility to make some decisions about how we do things. And it's not, patting people on the head and say, someday you'll understand, but making sure we're clear on roles, I do think is okay. And I think in the end, people appreciate leaders who are willing to take responsibility as long as they're willing to have dialogue. I don't think you have to give away the store.
And wouldn't you agree that it's really important to reassert those roles, not only for the owner, but for the supervisor and frontline employee at the beginning of those dialogues?
Yes, I think role clarity, while it can be frustrating for people who feel like they're being put in a box, I think if you're consistent, I think is actually liberating for folks, because they're not wondering, well, what about this? What about that? But that again comes back to this challenge of making sure most of what you're doing reinforces that same message, as opposed to then turning around the next day and saying, oh, why didn't you go over and, take some initiative here? And gee, you just told me to stay in my box, right? So we've just got to think carefully through how we work that. And it's, again, we're back to art, not science.
Exactly. So we have a few minutes left, but I thought maybe we could end on a bit of a high note. I'm anticipating, but you pointed out that some of the numbers actually improved year over year in terms of how Gen Z is feeling about their place in the workplace. So can you speak to what maybe some of the drivers were for that improvement, especially in terms of the outlook of the industry? And
yeah, I can think of two things from our survey, and then a couple more that I think I would extrapolate from a little bit from what I'm hearing from employees and what I'm seeing with our own students at Washington State. I think as the corner gently turned with the pandemic, with the fits and starts, but people realized, okay, this is sort of a new normal, but it's not the thing we were in there, the first 3 months, which then felt like forever. And especially if you're a new worker, it was forever. It was your entire career. And you realize, okay, this isn't my entire career. This is going to continue to move and evolve, but in a way that I understand. And the economy hasn't crashed. In fact, it's still going crazy here in most sectors. All right, we're starting to feel a little better about this. Still a lot of uncertainty. We don't know what it means. But things are still pretty good. I do think, though, that as we've seen a little more trepidation about the economy, I think some of this optimism is going to fade. I think the sense that the almost literally the people's physical safety and the safety of their loved ones was no longer quite at risk because of most people's shared sense of and those kinds of things also had an impact on this. The other thing, though, that I would say is I would not underestimate even a little bit of folks being able to interact. And remember, folks who are telling us they want to work from home, most of them are saying we want a hybrid. We don't want to be 100% remote. And I will contrast, for us, fall 21 and fall 22 with respect to our teaching. In fall 21, we got everybody back into our classroom unless they were going to online programs. We said, come on back. But it wasn't the same. Everybody was masked. There was a lot of concern. And nobody who was at Washington State University as a student in 21, 22 will tell you it was a normal. It did not feel great. It began to feel better, and you begin to be able to see, okay, I think where this is going to go is better. When we brought people back this year, in August, with a vaccine, still a vaccine on the books, like we have for like 9 others you're supposed to be vaccinated for. It just became part of the milieu. No mask requirement. Occasionally, if people had symptoms or had concerns, they'd mask up. But the professors, typically not masked. The students not masked. No obsession over social distancing, and no devastating consequences. I think optimism in general about college and then life beyond college began to grow. As people saw others getting back into the workplace, I think that was beginning to tick up when we did this survey. And I think that trend continued. I think people realizing that what we were doing, the new normal, was not a stable point, but a continued evolution in how we are going to deal with this amazing public health challenge that we've had. People just began to realize this is what it is. I read a very interesting piece from a consulting company that talked about also, though, that expecting people to snap right back to where we were before is definitely not something we should expect. It analogized it to to the difficulty people have in snapping back from a military deployment. We had all been deployed Again, not to minimize the sacrifices and services of our people in uniform, but we had all been deployed. We didn't choose this, right? We were deployed, and now it's like, all right, your deployment's over, everybody come back. And it was daunting in the same way that people who come back from a deployment are kind of like, oh, where am I now? And I think we're beginning to get some comfort level to what we've returned to.
Yeah, I have to agree. It has not been immediate, but the demand for getting back together has certainly presented itself.
Yeah.
Which is
and people are embracing that in different ways with different levels of enthusiasm.
Yeah. Dean Hunter, any last minute thoughts that you can leave the audience with today?
Well, I guess I don't want to miss a chance to celebrate our Gen Z for their resilience for the most part. And I hope that's one message that we do take from these studies and certainly from the work we're doing in higher ed is this is a bunch that's been through quite a lot over the last few years in a time in life which is very formative. And this is an amazing thing. And I don't think, I think this group will be different for a long time as a result of what they've been through. But I don't know that that's bad or good. It's just different. And I think in some ways, if we can build dialogue and celebrate their resilience while continuing to make sure that we take our responsibilities as leaders to challenge them in the appropriate ways, I think we're going to learn a lot from one another. And we've got a real base of talent here on which to build. I'm super excited, for example, about this year's first year class at Washington State. See them come in with a lot of enthusiasm, very different from last year's first year class, which had come out of a very tough year, came into college wearing a mask. And then, can we go to a party? Of course we can, but is it safe? No, not really. All this kind of stuff. Yeah. This year's first years feel like young people ready to really, it's a weird time, but we're ready to get out there and really get some cool stuff done. And so as you look to build your own workforces, this is a great group they've got a ton of potential. They're optimistic about being a part of the Pacific Northwest economy, at least our business students are, and they're ready to contribute. They want to grow and become leaders. And so don't sleep on them. They're a great bunch. And our more experienced employees, we serve a lot of working professionals through our MBA programs, which are all online. So anybody can do them without picking up and moving to one of our campuses. And, they're reporting some very interesting things. They're sort of a, first level supervisor kind of thing. How do I move up in my career? Those sorts of places about these same kinds of things. Wow, these young people are very interesting to me. I wonder what I'm going to do with them. I think it's an exciting time to be working in this space.
Excellent. Dean Hunter, thank you again for you and your staff there for helping put this together. We'll look forward to future updates on the workforce study that you guys provide every year. And it just wonderful conversation this morning. So
thanks for having me, and thanks for doing such a nice job of facilitating. I didn't even peek in the chat because I figured you guys had it all covered, John. So thanks to you and the whole team. It's great.
So, great. And for those of you who took the time to join us today for Mind What Matters, thank you for taking the time out of your day. Be sure to support those sponsors to make this possible. And we look forward to seeing you on the next Mind What Matters. Have a good day.